The restaurant door swung open, and I felt my stomach drop. Something was off. Way off. My parents' anniversary celebration had clearly ended without me. Empty plates lined the white tablecloth. Wine glasses sat half-empty, with condensation pooling around their bases. That particular kind of silence that settles in after someone else's credit card has been swiped. Mom spotted me first, her face lighting up with that gentle expression she always wears when she needs something. "Oh, sweetie, you made it," she said, her voice like honey. Then came the punchline, delivered so casually it almost sounded rehearsed. "You'll grab the check though, won't you?" My sister Emma burst out laughing. Not shocked, not uncomfortable, just amused. And that's the exact moment everything crystallized for me. I wasn't invited here to celebrate anything. I was summoned here to end a pattern that had been suffocating me for years. My name is Maya. I'm 30 years old. And my family has spent most of those years describing me with a single word. Reliable. Dependable Maya. Easygoing Maya. Maya who never complains. They thought it was praise. I eventually realized it was a job description. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Looking at my family from the outside, everything appears picture perfect. Parents who've stayed married through it all. A younger sister with that magazine-ready smile. Holiday photos that look like they belong in a department store catalog. Sit us at any table, and you'd assume we were the definition of a loving, functional family. But here's what nobody tells you about families. Closeness isn't about how many dinners you share. It's about who gets permission to matter. Who gets to take up oxygen in the room. Growing up, Emma consumed all the air. Her feelings dictated the household temperature. Her preferences shaped every decision. If Emma wanted Chinese food, we ate Chinese. If Emma had a bad day, everyone tiptoed. I learned pretty quickly that staying quiet meant staying safe. Being low maintenance earned me those approving nods from Mom. When I didn't ask for anything, she'd squeeze my shoulder and say, "See, Maya gets it." Understanding. That became my entire identity. By the time I hit my late 20s, that understanding came with a price tag. Nothing official, nothing on paper. Just these expectations. Little requests that started small. Can you cover groceries this week? Can you help with the electric bill? There's this trip we really want to take, but we're a bit short. Every single time, it was framed as temporary. A one-time thing. A favor between family. Every single time, it became permanent. I never actually told my family what I do for a living. I didn't lie, exactly. I just never corrected their assumptions. They thought I had some modest office job, something predictable and safe that explained why I dressed simply and never talked about money. Letting them underestimate me kept things peaceful. It also kept their hands extended toward me, palms up, always asking. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Drop a comment if this hits home. Mom and Dad loved their celebrations. Anniversaries, birthdays, Emma's smallest achievements treated like national holidays. They gravitated toward restaurants with mood lighting and waiters who knew wine pairings. Places where the menus don't bother listing prices, because if you have to ask, well. And somehow I was always invited last. After the reservation was made. After the date was set. After every decision had been finalized without me. I told myself it was just bad timing. Coincidence. That comforting lie you repeat until your brain accepts it as truth. The night of their anniversary, I arrived straight from a long day at work. Exhausted but present. I'd even brought a gift, something thoughtful and personal that showed I cared enough to remember. But standing there, looking at those cleared plates and satisfied smiles, I felt that old familiar tightness wrapping around my chest. The one that whispers, "You already know how this ends, don't you?" I watched Mom's eyes drift toward the leather check folder. Watched Dad lean back in his chair, completely content. Watched Emma scroll through her phone without a care in the world, probably already planning her next post. They weren't waiting for me to join their celebration. They were waiting for me to pay for it. And for the first time in my entire life, instead of shrinking into that familiar role, instead of reaching for my wallet with a forced smile, I wondered, What would actually happen if I just stopped? But stopping wasn't going to be as simple as saying no, because this pattern had roots that went deeper than I'd ever imagined. And when I finally saw the full picture, everything changed. I lowered myself into the only empty chair at the table. The seat they'd saved for me, though saved feels like the wrong word. It was more like they'd left space for a service to be performed. The table still carried that rich smell of finishing touches, butter and wine, and expensive dessert. Mom reached for her water, sighing with the satisfaction of someone who just enjoyed a flawless evening. "You really should have gotten here sooner," she said, not quite scolding, just observing. The duck was incredible. Dad nodded, already loosening his tie. "You missed the best courses." Emma finally glanced up from her screen. "We did save you some bread, though." She paused, then let out this little laugh. "Well, technically there might be one piece left." A server materialized with that slim leather folder, placing it precisely in the center of the table with practiced grace. Nobody reached for it. Nobody even looked at it directly. It just existed there, waiting. A silent test I was apparently scheduled to pass. Mom tilted her head, that gentle coaxing expression firmly in place. "You don't mind handling this, do you? I mean, you've been working so much lately." She let that sentence float, unfinished, as if my recent workload somehow created an obligation. Emma set her phone down, eyes moving from the check to my face with barely concealed amusement. "Oh, come on, relax. You're always so good at taking care of things." Another smile, bright and oblivious. "It's kind of your thing." That phrase hit differently this time. Your thing. As if paying for everyone else's enjoyment had become part of my personality. A defining trait. I looked around the table, slowly. Dad suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Mom's expression remained frozen in that patient smile. Emma had already returned to her scrolling, the matter apparently settled in her mind. Something clicked into place. Not anger, not yet. Just this sudden, sharp clarity. My mind started replaying the past year like a highlight reel. All those last-minute dinner invitations. The texts that only came after plans were already set. The way nobody ever asked what worked for my schedule, just informed me where to show up. Tonight's invitation had been exactly 4 words. "We're at Marcello's. Come. When you can." Such casual phrasing for such a calculated expectation. I stared at those spotless plates again. No remnants, no hesitation. They hadn't been sitting here waiting for me to eat with them. They'd been waiting for me to arrive and fulfill my function. Have you ever felt like an ATM to your own family? Let me know in the comments. This wasn't about celebration. This wasn't even really about money. This was about certainty. They were certain I'd show up. Certain I'd pay. Certain I wouldn't create discomfort by refusing. That certainty had been built over years, reinforced every single time I stayed silent to keep the peace. Every time I swallowed my frustration with a smile. The check folder seemed to grow heavier just sitting there, untouched. I reached for my water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and said absolutely nothing. I didn't argue or explain or justify. Because in that crystallizing moment, I understood something I'd been actively avoiding for far too long. This wasn't a misunderstanding between family members. This was a system. A well-oiled machine that ran on my silence and my bank account. And systems don't break because you have a heartfelt conversation about feelings. Systems break when someone stops feeding them the fuel they need to function. I paid that night's bill. Not because I felt obligated, and definitely not because I was afraid of confrontation. I paid because I needed one final data point. One last clear confirmation that I wasn't imagining things, wasn't being overly sensitive, wasn't misreading the situation. The drive home felt strange. City lights streamed past my windshield in blurred lines. My phone buzzed once against the console. A text from Mom. "Thanks for taking care of that. We knew we could count on you." No heart emoji. No warmth. Just relief, like checking off a completed task. At home, the silence felt different. Not heavy or oppressive. Focused. I set my keys in their dish, kicked off my heels, and opened my laptop. The screen's blue glow filled the dark room, steady and honest. I didn't open my work files. Instead, I opened a folder I'd been building for years but never wanted to look at directly. The one I'd never given an actual name, because naming it would make it real. Payments, invoices, transfers, support. Each individual entry looked reasonable on its own, justifiable, normal family help. But together, stacked month after month after month, they told a completely different story. I scrolled slowly, letting myself actually see it. Dinner after dinner after dinner. Emma's rent that one summer. Travel expenses when they decided to visit the coast. Emergency loans that were never discussed again, let alone repaid. Utility bills I'd been covering so long that nobody even asked anymore. This wasn't generosity I'd been providing. This was infrastructure. Foundation. The hidden support beams holding up everyone else's lifestyle. I thought I'd feel angry looking at those numbers. But what I felt was something far more dangerous. Absolute clarity. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I leaned back in my chair, letting those numbers settle into my consciousness. The total wasn't what shocked me anymore. It was the timeline that made my breath catch. How early this had started. How quietly it had grown. How seamlessly everyone had adjusted their lives around my silent support. James walked into the room carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. My husband doesn't ask intrusive questions. He just reads the room, understands the weight of silence, and shows up. He set one mug beside my laptop and waited. They didn't even pretend tonight, I said quietly. He nodded, taking a sip from his own mug. They didn't have to. I told him what Emma had said. That laugh. That casual dismissal. It's kind of your thing. James's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed measured. That's what people say when they've convinced themselves you'll never stop providing. I stared at the screen again, at the lines of data that used to feel like kindness, but now read like a contract I'd never agreed to sign. This ends, I said. Not angrily, just clearly, like stating a simple fact about gravity or weather. James didn't argue. He didn't pump his fist or launch into a speech. He just asked one careful question. Do you want to talk to someone before you make a move? I already knew who. My attorney, the one who handles my actual financial planning, not my emotional baggage. The one who deals in boundaries and documentation. I closed the laptop finally. Not because I was finished looking, but because the plan was already forming in my mind like ice crystals spreading across glass. Clear. Inevitable. Beautiful in its simplicity. I wasn't going to confront them with accusations. I wasn't going to send some long, emotional message listing every grievance. I wasn't going to make this dramatic or give them ammunition to paint me as unreasonable. I was simply going to stop participating. And the moment I did, I knew exactly what would happen. The collapse wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be immediate. Sometimes silence is the loudest response. Have you ever had to just stop? Tell me your experience. I didn't send any announcements to my family. No lengthy explanation. No hints or warnings. I just let routine do what it always does. Carry people forward under the assumption that patterns never change. 2 weeks crawled by. Then Mom's text arrived, right on schedule. Dinner this weekend. Same place. We should all be together. No question mark. No discussion of timing. Just an address and an assumption. I replied with one word. Okay. When I arrived that evening, the scene was almost identical to the last time. Warm lighting that made everyone look softer and more beautiful. The hostess smiled with recognition, like we were valued regulars. My parents were already seated, drinks in hand. Emma was mid-performance, gesturing wildly while her boyfriend nodded along like everything she said deserved an audience. They didn't stop talking when I sat down. Mom touched my arm briefly, barely pausing her conversation. There you are. We went ahead and ordered for the table. You know how long menus take when everyone's trying to decide. I smiled. Not forced, not tight. Just calm. Dinner unfolded with familiar choreography. Plates appeared and disappeared. Wine bottles materialized without anyone discussing cost. Dad's laugh grew louder after his second glass. Emma angled her phone just right for photos, capturing moments for an audience that wasn't actually there. Nobody asked what I wanted. I noticed everything this time with almost scientific observation. The way Mom leaned back, completely satisfied. The way Dad didn't even glance at prices. The way Emma ordered appetizers to share and then positioned them closest to herself. It was performance art, perfectly rehearsed over years of repetition. Halfway through the meal, Mom said casually, "Oh, did you ever sort out that thing we talked about?" I knew exactly what she meant. Another expense. Another assumption that I'd handle it. "Not yet," I said simply. She nodded, unconcerned. "Well, we'll discuss it later." Later. That word used to make my stomach clench with anxiety. Tonight it felt meaningless. When dessert plates arrived, I caught our server's attention and gave a subtle nod. She hesitated for just a moment, reading something in my expression, then placed the check folder at the table's edge. Same position. Same expectant silence. Nobody moved. The folder sat there like a test everyone was certain I'd pass. Mom glanced at it, then at me, her expression gentle. "Whenever you're ready, sweetheart." I didn't reach for it. Instead, I stood up smoothly. "I need to speak with the manager for a moment." The table froze. Emma blinked twice. "Why?" "Just have a question," I said, my voice steady. The manager approached quickly, all professional courtesy. I lowered my voice just enough that they couldn't hear every word, but enough that they knew something significant was happening. "Hi," I said clearly. "I need to confirm something about the payment arrangements for this table." The manager checked his tablet, his expression shifting from pleasant to attentive. "Yes, it appears previous authorizations have been removed from the account." Mom sat up straighter, her posture suddenly rigid. "What does that mean?" The manager glanced between us. "It means we'll need a current payment method from tonight's party." The silence that followed was the sound of a system realizing it no longer had fuel. And systems that run out of fuel don't slowly wind down. They stop. Completely. What happened next changed everything forever. The silence landed like a physical weight. Dad cleared his throat, that nervous sound people make when reality doesn't match expectations. "There's usually no problem with the account." The manager maintained his professional composure. "I understand, sir. But tonight we'll need a payment method from your party." Mom's eyes locked onto mine. Really looked at me, probably for the first time in months. Her gentle smile evaporated. "Maya." I met her gaze steadily. "I won't be covering dinner tonight." Emma let out this sharp bark of laughter, disbelief wrapped in mockery. "Okay, very funny. Good joke." "I'm serious," I said. Dad frowned, confusion mixing with the first hints of frustration. "What's going on here?" I slid back into my chair, folded my hands calmly in my lap. "What's going on is that I've been paying for far more than meals for a very long time. And I'm done." Mom's voice dropped to that dangerous, quiet register. "You're doing this here? In public?" "I'm not doing anything," I said evenly. "I'm just not doing what you expected me to do." Emma scoffed, her face flushing. "So, you're just going to embarrass us? Humiliate your own family?" I turned to look at her directly. "You weren't embarrassed when you laughed at me last time. When you called handling everyone's expenses my thing." Her mouth opened, then closed without sound. For once, Emma had no response ready. Dad leaned forward, trying to take control. "This is family, Maya. You don't just stop helping people without talking about it first." "I've been talking," I said. "For years. You just haven't been listening." The manager shifted his weight uncomfortably. I turned to him with a slight smile. "We'll need separate checks, please." Mom inhaled sharply, like I'd physically struck her. "Separate?" "Yes," I said clearly. "Mine and yours." The manager nodded and stepped away with visible relief at having clear instructions. Mom's face flushed deep red. "You can't do this." "I can," I replied. "And I am." Have you ever had to stand your ground with family? Drop a comment with your experience. It helps to know we're not alone. Emma shoved her chair back with a scraping sound. "This is absolutely unbelievable. After everything we've done for you." I almost laughed. Not from cruelty, but from the sheer absurdity of that statement. The clarity was so sharp it almost hurt. What you've done, I said slowly, letting each word land, is teach me that love comes with an invoice. And I don't accept that contract anymore. Dad shook his head, frustration hardening into something uglier. You think you're teaching us some kind of lesson? No, I said simply. I'm teaching myself one. The checks returned. One slim folder for my single drink. One thick stack for everything they'd consumed without restraint. Mom stared at it like it was written in an alien language, incomprehensible and threatening. I don't have my card with me, she said automatically, the words coming out like a reflex. I know, I said. Emma leaned toward her boyfriend, whispering something urgent. He stood up awkwardly, avoiding everyone's eyes. I need to take this call, he muttered, already moving toward the exit at impressive speed. Mom's hands actually trembled as she opened her purse, rifling through it with increasing desperation. Dad reached for his wallet, then hesitated, his fingers hovering. For the first time, maybe ever, they looked genuinely unsure. Not angry, not indignant. Unprepared. The manager waited with patient professionalism. Mom looked up at me, her eyes sharp now, searching. You're enjoying this. I'm not, I said honestly. I'm finished. She studied my face, looking for the guilt she expected to find. Looking for the softness she'd always been able to exploit. Looking for the daughter who would cave and fix everything at the last second. That daughter wasn't there anymore. She'd left the building. They paid slowly, awkwardly, with credit cards that required phone calls and confirmations. The questions were asked by staff that nobody wanted to answer. I paid my small portion and stood up. As I turned to leave, Mom said my name. Not sharply, not sweetly, just uncertain, like she was calling out to someone she wasn't sure existed anymore. I didn't turn around. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. I knew this wasn't finished. I knew phones would ring off the hook. Messages would flood in. Accusations would fly like missiles. But the system had broken. The machine had ground to a halt. And once that happens, once the gears stop turning, nothing ever works the same way again. What I didn't know was that the aftermath would reveal so much more than I expected. Not just about them, but about myself. The real transformation was just beginning. The fallout didn't arrive all at once like an explosion. It came in waves, each one testing different boundaries. Short texts that started polite and deteriorated into accusations. Missed calls that left voicemails ranging from concerned to furious. Messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly very interested in what's going on with the family. I didn't respond to any of it. Not out of spite or revenge. Out of certainty. Out of knowing that engaging would only restart the machine I'd worked so hard to break. Without my quiet financial support, things shifted faster than I'd anticipated. The dinner invitations stopped completely. Plans that used to be announced with confidence were suddenly postponed indefinitely. That easy confidence my parents wore like expensive cologne began to crack. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough to notice. Just enough to be real. Emma stopped posting photos from places with dress codes and reservation lists. Her boyfriend never reappeared in family conversations. Not one mention. Like he'd been erased from their history. Nobody apologized. I didn't expect them to, honestly. What surprised me most was how little guilt I actually felt about the whole thing. I had spent years imagining this moment, convinced it would devastate me, that I'd mourn the loss of something precious. Instead, I felt steady, grounded. Like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. At home, life developed a quietness that felt nourishing rather than empty. James and I ate dinner without rushing through courses. We talked about work, about dreams, about plans that belonged only to us and didn't require anyone else's approval or input. For the first time in my adult life, my time felt like it actually belonged to me. I didn't cut my family off completely. I just stopped cushioning their lives. Stopped smoothing over rough edges. Stopped paying to make consequences disappear. When they reached out, I answered honestly but briefly. When they asked for help, I said no without crafting elaborate explanations or justifications. And something genuinely strange happened. The world didn't collapse. Relationships didn't end in dramatic explosions. I didn't transform into some cruel, heartless person. I just became clear about who I was and what I would accept. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. The restaurant incident faded into memory like old photographs. But the lesson stayed sharp and present. Boundaries aren't walls designed to keep everyone out forever. They're doors you get to control. Doors you choose when to open and when to keep firmly closed. And once you close a door that's been draining you for years, that's been bleeding you dry emotionally and financially, the silence on the other side isn't loneliness. It's peace. It's freedom. It's the sound of your own life finally belonging to you. 3 months later, I got a text from Mom. Just 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at those words for a long time. James saw my expression and came to sit beside me. What do you want to do? He asked quietly. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know what I won't do. I won't go back to being their safety net. Their silent agent. Their reliable daughter who understands. He squeezed my hand. Then that's your answer. I texted back. I'm willing to talk. But things are different now. Her response took hours. When it finally came, it wasn't an apology. It was just, I know. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe it wasn't. The difference was that I got to decide. Not based on guilt or obligation or fear of conflict. Based on what I needed, what I deserved, what made my life better rather than just making their lives easier. If you've ever been the person who always shows up, who always pays, who always fixes what nobody else wants to face, I need you to hear something important. You're not selfish for stopping. You're not cruel for choosing yourself. You're not a bad person for setting boundaries, even with family. Especially with family, sometimes the people who truly love you will adjust. They'll respect your boundaries once they realize you're serious. The people who don't, the ones who can't handle you having limits, well, they were never really loving you anyway. They were loving what you provided. And that's not the same thing at all. My name is Maya. I'm 30 years old. And I'm no longer easy. I'm no longer reliable in the way they wanted me to be. I'm no longer the daughter who understands that love means sacrifice without reciprocation. I'm just someone who finally learned that the most important person to show up for is yourself. That the most important bill to pay is the one you owe to your own peace of mind. That the most important dinner to never miss is the one where you're feeding your own soul instead of everyone else's expectations. And if my story felt familiar to you, if you saw yourself somewhere in these words, I want you to know something. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to walk out of restaurants where you're not really a guest, just an expected payment method. The door is always there, waiting for you to realize you can open it and walk through to the other side. Where your life belongs to you. Where silence is peace. Where boundaries aren't cruelty. They're freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember to like this video, subscribe, and share where you're listening from. Your support means everything, and your story matters too. You're not alone in this.